Sorry, I still got my notes from when Sam and Jesse were up here. We had to get things lined out. So, I don't know if you had nicknames when you were growing up. Maybe you have some now. Or maybe there are names of people, like, things that you called other people. And hopefully a lot of those things were positive. But a lot of times they're based on, like, character traits, right? There's something about you or there's something about that person, and you just call them a name that has to do with that. And even just nicknames, even just not even necessarily nicknames, but just kind of, adjectives that we use to describe people. They have a lot of impact, right? So let me give you some names that were used to refer to the President of the United States. Idiot, coward, gorilla, unshapely, a fool, a dictator. One person wrote in an article, "He has continued to mortify and shame the intelligent people of this great nation. His speeches have demonstrated that he is no more capable of becoming a statesman than a brained donkey can become a noble lion. His weak, wishy-washy, namby-pamby efforts, imbecile in matter, disgusting in manner, have made us the laughingstock of the whole world. The European powers will despise us because we have no better material out of which to make a president." That doesn't sound very good, does it? Someone else wrote just about his speeches. His speeches have fallen like a wet blanket. They put out all notions of greatness. It's kind of some harsh words to use about the president, isn't it? Now, there may be some of you that may be thinking, exactly. And there may be some of you that are thinking, man, that's harsh. How could they say something like that? Oh, I forgot to mention which president. Those things were said about Abraham Lincoln. All those things that I just shared with you were said in public, in the newspaper, or from podiums about the president. If you heard just those things, what kind of perception would you have of Abraham Lincoln? Now, there are some good things. Think about some of the other nicknames that Lincoln has. The rail splitter from his job when he was a young man. The great emancipator. Uncle Abraham. Honest Abe. Which, by the way, I found out, didn't know this until this week, Abraham Lincoln hated the nickname Abe. He wanted to be called Abraham, but there were so many different people that, especially when campaign posters and stuff, it was just easier to fit the word Abe instead of Abraham. So it got used a lot. But think about, that's, back in Civil War times, the kind of perception that people had based on what they heard other people say about Abraham Lincoln. There were people that had never even heard of him, didn't know a whole lot about him, but they see this kind of stuff in the newspaper, or they hear this kind of stuff in public speeches. What kind of perception does that give? And I want us to be thinking about that. I want us to be thinking about what people's perception of us is based on our character traits, or how we treat people, or maybe even worse, what other people have said about us. And the things that people assume about us because of what they heard somebody else say. Not only that, let's put it on ourselves. How often do we have a negative perception of not just presidents and politicians and famous people, but people in our workplaces, people in our neighborhoods, those other parents that have a kid on the same team that our kid is on? How many negative perceptions do we have of some of those people because not what we've experienced ourselves, what somebody else has told us about them? See, words and names have a lot of power, don't they? They influence how we view ourselves. They influence how we view other people around us. And I want you to be thinking about that as we do, as Luke mentioned earlier, we look at some more of these questions of Jesus. Not the questions that Jesus was asked, even though he was asked a lot of them, but questions that he asked other people. And we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now and recognizing that there are a lot of different questions that Jesus asked other people. And sometimes those were rhetorical questions. He wasn't needing an immediate answer. He really just wanted the people that he was talking to just kind of think on that and chew on it. Maybe go home and think about it for a while. And then there's sometimes that he asked direct questions. I want an answer right now. What do you think about this? How do you feel about this? Whatever the question was. And that's the kind of question that we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at Mark chapter 8. And so if you got your Bibles, feel free to turn to Mark chapter 8. If you got a Bible app, scroll there. If you're looking for it, it's the first part of the New Testament. It's the second book in what we call the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Those 4 books talk about the life of Jesus when he was here on this earth. And the second book in that series is the book of Mark. And in Mark chapter 8, we find Jesus, he's probably been doing ministry for a while. He's been teaching, he's been performing miracles, he's got kind of a following now. There's people who know who he is. There's people who really like him and really think a lot of him, especially because of the miracles that he's done. And he's got some other people that don't think very much of him. He's been saying some kind of, if not necessarily bold things, at least some blunt things, and some things that are stretching people a little bit. And so he's kind of got people saying all sorts of things about him because of what he's been doing and because of what he's been saying. But then he asks this direct question in Mark chapter 8. I'm going to start in verse 27. Jesus and his disciples, his followers, went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked them, who do people say I am? What are people saying about me? What are people saying that, like, that guy Jesus, he is, and then fill in the blank? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. What about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? And Peter answered, you're the Messiah. Now, I want us to look, first of all, at the direct question that Jesus asked. He asked a question first, like, what are other people saying about me? What are you hearing about me? And, the response was, it kind of varied. I mean, John the Baptist, if you don't know much about John the Baptist, he was the guy that kind of came before Jesus and said, there's this guy, Jesus, that's coming. But John was very confrontational. He was very blunt, very direct. I mean, even some of the local preachers that came to hear him, as soon as he saw him walking up to him, he'd start calling them a pit of snakes. That's not a way to win over an audience. And he was just really direct. And people were saying, well, what do I need to do my life better, to live my life better? And John the Baptist would be like, you need to quit doing what you're doing. And he would name off the things that they were doing. And he ended up being thrown in prison for it and ended up having his head cut off because of it. And some people were saying, this Jesus seems a lot like John the Baptist. Or maybe he's Elijah. Elijah was a prophet back in the Old Testament times. It did the same kind of thing as John the Baptist. Very blunt, very direct. Elijah's a guy that confronted the 450 prophets of this idol Baal and had the contest with him and called the fireball down from heaven. And some of these people in Jesus' day were saying, people are calling you Elijah, lived hundreds of years ago. They think he's come back to life in you. Or maybe one of these other prophets. And so it's good to know, it's important to know what people's perception was, but Jesus gets a little bit more direct. And he looks at his disciples, he says, okay, who do you say I am? And that's the question that I want us to pay attention to today. Who do you say I am? Jesus is trying to get to the core of his disciples' faith. You've seen me. You've seen what I can do. You've heard the things that I've said. You've heard the things that I've taught. You've also heard what other people are saying about me, how other people are feeling about me. But I want you to tune all that out for right now. I want you to tune out what other people are saying or what you may have even assumed about me before you really got to know me. And I want to know right now, in this moment, how do you see me? Who do you say that I am? And I'll be honest with you, folks, of all the questions that Jesus asked, they're really good questions. A lot of them are important. This may be one of the most crucial questions that he ever asked his disciples. Now, I'll take that a step further. It may be one of the most crucial questions that we need to answer for ourselves today. Who do you say that I am? How do you see me? So here's what I want to do. You don't have to. I'm not going to check on your way out the door this morning. But if you got a bulletin, flip it over on the back to where there's an area for sermon notes. If you want to use your phone, use your notes app on your phone. If you want to write in the palm of your hand, if you just want to have it in mind, whatever you want to do. But I want you to answer that question right now. In this moment, right now, April 14th, 2024, who do you say that Jesus is? What's the word that comes to mind? Maybe a couple of words. Who do you say that Jesus is? What do you know about him? What do you see in him? If we ask that question and got an honest response, again, this is between you, yourself, and Jesus. I'm not going to look. There might be some negative names that we come up with. And if we ask people in our community, and if we ask people across our country, who do you say that Jesus is? There's a lot of different things that might come up. This negative perception that people have. Who do I say Jesus is? Well, I might say that he's judgmental. I might say he's a racist. He's a homophobe. He's mean. He's sexist. He's a male chauvinist. He's arrogant. He's fake. I don't know, he's irrelevant. And the list could go on and on. Because there's a lot of people, and maybe people in this room, or people who are watching online right now, who don't have a very good picture of Jesus. Who, when you say, who is Jesus to you, these are some of the words that come to mind. And maybe it's because that's the way that other people have portrayed Jesus to us. So we have this kind of the negative picture of him. Or maybe we feel this way because of our own personal experience. We've been treated in a negative way. Or maybe even we prayed and we didn't get what we prayed for. We begged God to do something. We asked Jesus to move in some way and it didn't happen that way. And so now we're like, well, I don't think Jesus is even real in the first place. Maybe we have this negative perception of Jesus because of what we see in the people who claim to wear his name. Maybe we have a negative perception of Jesus because those who call themselves followers of Jesus do one or more of these things. And if I've experienced racism, if I've experienced judgment, if I've experienced arrogance from people who claim to be followers of Jesus, why would I want to be connected to him myself? Why would I want to have anything to do with him? And let me just acknowledge, that's real. And if you're sitting here right now this morning, or again, if you're watching online and you have experienced any or multiple ones of these things, from those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus, from those of us who wear his name, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry you experienced that. I'm sorry we did that to you. I want to apologize to my God for giving him that kind of perception in the eyes of somebody else because of the way that I acted. But I want to recognize when we answer this question, when we answer it honestly, we may have some negative perceptions. But if you go back to that other screen with all those words, guys, if you see any of these things in Jesus, I want you to know that's not the Jesus I know. The Jesus that I know is not judgmental. He's accepting. The Jesus that I know is not exclusive. He's inclusive. The Jesus that I know is not mean-spirited. He is full of compassion. The Jesus I know is not irrelevant. He is completely significant. The Jesus that I know wants to bring peace and hope to your life. The Jesus that I know wants to rescue people from darkness, and he wants to forgive people from their sins, and he wants to set people free from whatever it is that's imprisoning them. The Jesus that I know chose to give up everything to give me everything. The Jesus that I know begged his Father to forgive the very people that in that moment were killing him. That's the Jesus that I know. And I hope that you see him that way too. And even as I say all those things, it's difficult to put all those traits kind of into one word. But one of Jesus' disciples tried. So go back and look, you got this question, who do you say I am? Look at Peter's answer, and I'll do this as quick as I can. In Mark chapter 8, look at again in verse 29 what Peter says. Peter says, you are the Messiah. And I want you to understand That's a powerful statement that Peter's making right there. And we don't have time to go into all the details of what the concept of a Messiah was to Jewish people in Jesus' day. But they had this concept, and Jewish people nowadays still have this. They're still waiting for the Messiah. But in Jesus' day, they had this picture of a lot of different character traits, but ultimately this warrior king that was going to gather an army and was going to ride into Israel, into Judea, and was going to drive out all the Roman armies and all the Gentiles that were occupying God's land for his people. And that guy was going to establish himself as a king once again, and was going to restore the glory of Israel back to the way it was all the way back, a few thousand years ago when David was king. And they were waiting for that guy. They were expecting that guy. And there's some character traits that are kind of common character traits in the Messiah. And one is that he was a conqueror, that he was going to conquer these occupying forces, that he was going to rally this huge army, he was going to rescue oppressed people. He was also going to be king. After he drove out the foreign armies, he was going to set up his kingdom and he was going to rule, but not as a dictator, but as a powerful but benevolent king who loved his people. But some people also saw him not necessarily as a king or maybe as a king, but also as a high priest. The high priest was the one who kind of made sure that God's people stayed connected to God. And they stayed in a relationship with him. And this Messiah was going to reestablish and be the greatest high priest that there ever had been, and was going to help people stay connected and in a relationship with God. But he was also going to be a teacher. He was going to know the law. He was going to know all the rules, all the things you're supposed to do to make God happy and to live your life in the right way. And not only was he going to know those things, he was going to be able to share those things and teach those things to the people so that they could do what God wanted them to do on a regular basis. These are some of the main character traits of the Messiah. So when you read this in Mark chapter 8 and verse 29, when Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" and Peter says, "You're the Messiah," I want you to understand, he's not just saying, I think you're this one guy that's been prophesied about. Peter's saying, I see all these character traits wrapped up in you. I believe, Jesus, that it's you. And I've grown up since I was a kid hearing about one day this Messiah was going to come. This conqueror, king, high priest, teacher was going to come and do all these amazing things. And even if I don't fully understand that, Jesus, I think it's you. What a powerful statement. And the reason I want us to see Peter's answer this morning is because I believe that Jesus is still the Messiah. That Jesus is still a teacher. That he teaches us about things that really matter. That if we pay attention to his words, he teaches us where to find true meaning in life. And he teaches us how to treat other people. And he teaches us how to live our lives the way that God wants us to. He teaches us about what's real and what's not, and what's true and what's fake. In Matthew chapter 11, he even says this. He says in verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and" what? "Learn from me." Learn from me. I'll teach you. I'll help you find peace. I'll help you find rest. I'll help you find meaning and purpose in this life. I believe Jesus is still a high priest. That he still wants to be connected with us, and he still wants to guide us into establishing a closer, more intimate connection with the Father. That he came to this earth to experience and to know what it's like to be us, so that he can go to the Father on our behalf and say, yeah, this is one of your kids, and they're struggling, or they're tired, or they're exhausted, or they're hurting, and I know what that's like. And Father, we need to bless them. We need to help them. We need to rescue them. We have a high priest that goes and talks to God on our behalf on a regular basis. The author of Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 15, we don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one. We have a high priest who has been tempted in every way just as we are. Yet he didn't sin. So let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. We have free access to the creator of the universe because we have a high priest that paves the way for us and makes sure that we stay connected to our Father. Jesus, I believe, is still a conqueror, not one who topples governments or invades nations. He conquers sin. He conquers darkness. He conquers guilt. He conquers regret. He conquers hopelessness. He conquered all of those things that try to control my thoughts and my actions and my emotions and my relationships and my soul. Paul says in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 15, having disarmed the powers and the authorities, not governmental powers and authorities, not army powers and authorities, but the powers and authority of Satan in this world, of evil in this world. He disarmed that power. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. The thing that was supposed to be embarrassing and humiliating for Jesus in this horrible way that he died on the cross, he used that to humiliate and embarrass and destroy, completely conquer sin and death. Isn't that awesome? I don't have to fight that battle because he already won it, because he's a conqueror. And I still believe that Jesus is, or at least should be, my king. Not a ruthless tyrant, not a merciless dictator, but a loving Lord who wants the absolute best for those who are willing to surrender their lives to him. To let him have control, to let him call the shots, to let him be the one in charge. He says, if you're still there in Mark chapter 8, you skip down a few more verses to verse 34, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up the cross and follow me. See, I don't call the shots. He does. I follow his direction. I surrender to his will because he wants the best for me. You see, Jesus is, not just was, Jesus is the Messiah. He is the teacher. He is our high priest. He is the mighty conqueror. And if I choose, he doesn't make me, but if I choose, he will be the king of my heart and my life. That wasn't just something for those folks back then. Those things are still true today. So, if you're face to face with Jesus right now, and he were to ask a question, who do you say I am? How would you answer? If you say, Jesus is my friend, Jesus is a healer, Jesus is my rock, he's my shepherd, Jesus is the answer for all my questions. Jesus is my guide, Jesus is my light. You wouldn't be wrong. He is all those things. When we were watching the video earlier, there's 95 names of Jesus, and I was sitting there watching with you, and I was like, yes, 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 he's all those things. And whatever name you would give him, however you describe him, you would probably be right, but I hope that this morning you'd also be able to say, Jesus is my Messiah. Not just the Messiah, he's my Messiah. That you could look Jesus back in the eye and say, Jesus, you are the one that I want to learn from. You are the one that teaches me what really matters. You are the one that I want to connect to, and you are the one that I desperately need to connect me to the Father. You are the one that I am choosing to surrender my life to. You're the one that I'm choosing to follow because you are the one who has conquered my sin and my flaws and my mistakes and my guilt. And folks, if that's not the Jesus that you know, I want you to know him. I want you to know that Jesus. Because that's the true Jesus. We're going to stand up here in just a second. We're going to sing a song together. Celebrating, honoring, lifting up the name of Jesus. And as we do that, I want to invite you to have an honest look at your own heart, an honest look at your own life, and come up with an honest answer to that question. And if there has been some distance between you and Jesus, if there's some negative perceptions that you have of Jesus, I would invite you to pray about that while we're singing together. I would invite you to come to the front and share that with us. We're okay with that. Our God's a big God. He's okay with that too. But I want to have an honest conversation with you about that and see why that's your perception of Jesus, and to pray about that and to walk through that journey together. I want that to happen this morning. If there's things that you recognize about Jesus, the things that we said this morning about him being a king and a conqueror and my friend and all these different things, but he's not that in your life, at least not right now. Maybe he was at one time, he's not anymore. Maybe you've never had that kind of relationship before where you ever saw him that way. Then let's change that this morning too. And you're welcome to come to the front and say, I'm ready to have Jesus be my Messiah. Or maybe I'm ready to have him in that place in my life again. And we will surround you with love and prayer and help and do whatever we can so that that becomes the Jesus in your life. If we can help in any way for you to get a clearer picture of who Jesus is, please come forward and share that with us now while together we stand and sing.